Hello everyone. Today in this video I'm going to talk about JVM architecture. Before we discuss JVM internals, let's first understand why we need JVM. Many of us has already written program in C++ during our college times. In C++, when we compile the program, it is converted into a code which is understood by particular underlying hardware. So if we try to run the same compiled code on another machine with a different hardware which understand different code will cause an error. So we have to recompile the program on new machine so it can be understood by new hardware. Coming to Java, on compilation, the program is not directly converted into the machine code. Rather, it is converted to an intermediate file called as a bytecode, or we also call it as a .class file. Bytecode is platform independent, but it is not something which machine understands. So in order to execute it, we first need to convert it into the machine readable format, which is done by Java interpreter and which is a part of JVM. And JVM resides inside JRE. And that is the reason we need JRE on any machine where we want to run Java applications. JVM is used in other languages also like Scala, Groovy, JRuby or Clojure. Let's see how exactly JVM works internally. JVM architecture is broadly divided into three subsystems. The first subsystem is class loader subsystem. It consists of three activities: loading, linking, and initialization. We'll discuss each of these stages in a while. The second subsystem is runtime data areas. Whenever JVM runs an application, it requires memory to store metadata of class, objects, and lot of other information. JVM organizes the memory required to execute a program in various runtime data areas. Some of these data areas are created on JVM startup and destroyed only when the JVM exit, or in other words when the program stops. In other data areas are per thread. That means when the thread is created, a data area is created and the data area is destroyed when the thread exit. There are five different data areas of JVM: method area, heap area, JVM stack, PC register, and native meta stack. The third subsystem of JVM is known as execution engine. Execution engine is a core of JVM. It mainly consists of three parts: interpreter, JIT compiler, we also call it as a just-in-time compiler, and garbage collector. There is also a native method interface or JNI and native method libraries. If you have ever browsed through the content of JRE folder, then you might have observed there are many .dll files. These files are written in languages other than Java, and to execute the code in these DLL files, the JNI is used. Now let's look at each of the components in detail. Before we discuss this class loader subsystem, have you ever wondered why we cannot refer to non-static methods or variables from static methods, or how the static blocks are executed even before the instance of class is created, or why we don't have to import any jar to use string, list, set, or any core Java classes in our application? Interesting, isn't it? The answer to all these questions is class loader subsystem. We'll see in detail how the class loader subsystem does all these. The class file generated by Java compiler is passed to the class loader subsystem, which is responsible for extracting various information, and this information will be used during the execution phase. It does this in three steps: loading, uh, linking, and initialization. The loading phase consists of three class loaders: bootstrap class loader, extension class loader, and application class loader. Then the second phase is linking phase. It consists of three stages: verification, preparation, and resolution. The resolution stage is optional here, and the last step in the class loader subsystem is initialization. Let's look at them in detail. Before we look at the loading activity, let's look at one simple example. So I have this class employee. I will create a main method here. Now you might have noticed we have something like this in Java. But have you ever wondered what information can we get using this object, or why this object is used for? Let's see what methods are available on this object. So if I do get here, so I can see there are a lot of methods which we can use, like get classes, get constructor, get fields, get methods. Let's try to use one to see what information we get. So I'm using get declare methods, and if I do something like this, and if I run the application now, yeah, the output I'm getting is main, because we have one method with name main defined for the employee class. If I add one more method to this class like this, and try to run the application again, yeah, so now the output changes. Here we are getting two methods, the main and function one now in the output. Pretty simple, right? But have you ever wondered where this employee.class is coming from? We haven't even created the instance of employee.class, but still we are able to fetch the metadata about the class. Is the employee.class and the instance of class is same? Let's try to figure it out by creating a few objects for employee. So I will create two objects of employee class now, employee 1 and employee 2. We'll try to print the hash code for employee 1, and we'll do the same for employee 2. Also, we'll try to print the hash code of class which employee 1 is pointing to, and we'll do the same on employee 2. Let's try to run this. Yeah, here we can see the hash code for employee 1 and employee 2 are not same, but the hash code for the class which employee 1 is referring to and the employee 2 is referring to is same. That means they both are pointing to the same instance of employee class, or employee.class I should say. Now let's get back to our presentation. So the loading process is responsible for reading the .class file and producing the binary representation of the type. This binary representation is stored in the JVM method area, and the loading process is also responsible for creating an instance of class java.lang.class that represents the type. So as we have seen in our example, the employee.class, which is from which we can fetch the metadata about the class, is created by this loading phase. If we have to see it graphically, then it will look something like this. In the method area, we'll have this employee representation or the binary representation, and we will have this employee.class created in the heap area. This class instance is an end product of the loading step, and it serves as an interface between the program and the internal data structure. To access the information about the type that is stored in the internal data structure, the program invokes method on the class instance of the type. There are three different types of class loader in the loading phase. So the JVM executes the program line by line. Whenever JVM comes across a particular type for the first time, JVM will check whether the corresponding type is already loaded or not. If it is already loaded, then the JVM will use the loaded class from the method area. Otherwise, the JVM will request the class loader subsystem to load the .class file. Then the class loader subsystem sends the request to application class loader. The application class loader will delegate this request to extension class loader. Here the application class loader will not serve the request. The application class loader will just delegate the request to extension class loader. Now the extension class loader will delegate the request to bootstrap class loader. Now the bootstrap class loader will search for the requested class in the bootstrap class path. The bootstrap class path is java home jre lib. So the Bootstrap class loader is responsible for loading your standard JDK classes from rt.jar. It contains all your core Java classes. Basically, this is a reason you don't have to import any jar to use string or list or any core Java classes in your application. If the class is found in the Bootstrap class path, then the class will get loaded. Otherwise, the request will get delegated to your extension class loader. Now the extension class loader search will search the class in the extension class path. The extension class loader is responsible for loading the classes from the extension jars present under Java Home, JRE, lib and extension folder. If the class is found in the extension class path, then it will get loaded. Otherwise, the request will be delegated to application class loader. Now the application class loader will search the class in the application class path. The application class loader is responsible for loading the class from the class path which is specified using -cp or class path parameter while invoking your application. If the class is found in the application, then it will get loaded. If the class is not located by any of these class loaders, then the runtime exception called class not found exception will be thrown. This loaders follows algorithm to load the class, which is known as delegation hierarchy algorithm. If we go back to our example and try doing something like this, yeah, as you can see, this class is present in our application, and that is why it is loaded by your application class loader. Let's move to the next stage, which is linking. After the class loader finishes loading the class, this linking activity starts. This activity consists of three stages: verification, preparation, and resolution. Let's look at the verification process. In this process, JVM will ensure whether the binary representation of the class or interface is structurally correct or not. It also ensures whether the .class file is generated by a valid compiler or not. It also checks whether the .class file is properly formatted or not. If any of these check fails, then JVM will throw an runtime error, java.line.verify error. Now, one might think how the program could have been manipulated since the compiler checks this validation before generating the .class file. But the .class file is vulnerable to change before JVM loads it. The bytecode using the class file is well documented, and someone having some knowledge of hex can change the values of hex code in the .class file, thus changing the behavior of the program. After Java Virtual Machine has loaded a class and performed whatever verification it chooses to do upfront, the class is ready for preparation. During the preparation phase, the virtual machine allocates memory for class variables and set them to the default initial values. The class values are not initialized to their proper initial values until the initialization phase. Let's understand this by taking one simple example. Let's say we have a class vehicle for which we have a static field called wheels, and we have assigned a value 2 to that field. In this step, only a memory will be allocated for this variable and the value will be set to 0. Actual values will be assigned as a part of initialization phase. Default values for various types are shown on the screen. Now let's go to the next stage, which is resolution. In this stage, all the symbolic references used in our class will be replaced with the actual references. So to understand what it means, let's take one simple example. Let's go back to our Eclipse and to the same employee class which we have used earlier. I have removed everything from the main method, and I have kept this function method empty, and have added one line over here. I'm just creating one string object over here, and so in Java we have seen earlier like the .java file is converted into .class file on compilation, and this .class file contains the bytecode. Now let's try to deassemble this .class file to see what exactly this bytecode file contains. To deassemble this dot class file, we have a utility called Java P in the standard installation folder of Java. So I will try to deassemble the employee.class. Let's see what output we get. Right. So here is the bytecode from your employee.java file. As you can see, we have defined two methods in the .java file. The two methods are present in the .class files also. The first is main method and the function method. Here you can see the flags are defined over here. For public static void main, flags are public and static, and for function it is only public. And we have this tag is equal to 3, local is equal to 2, and argument size is equal to 1. This argument size is straightforward. We are passing one argument of string array to main method, so that's why argument size is equal to 1, and the local is equal to 2 because we are defining a string object in the main method. That is why local is equal to 2. And for function one method, uh, we have argument size is equal to 1 and local is equal to 1. Now you might be wondering why the argument is equal to 1 and local is equal to 1, as we are not passing anything to this method. But this method is associated with the instance of the class, and this is the keyword which get passed to any method which is associated with the class. Now you might be wondering what this number means, this 16 and 17 and 20. Then if you want to see what this 16 means, then there is an employee pool which gets generated for each of the class. So for this employee class, this is a constant pool. Now if you see the first line over here is class, and it represents the class itself, that is a com, example, and employee. This is the fully qualified name of the class. Then we have this UTF-8, it is also referring to the same. And then we have this class which is referring to Java Lang object. And then we have UTF-8 Java Lang object. Why this object is getting referred? Because in Java, object class is the parent class of every class. That is why this is referred over here. Now if we go back to our main method, and we can see over here it is referring to number 16. So what it is referring to? So if you want to see, then we can see here the number 16 refers to the class, and it refers to number 17. Now the number 17 is pointing to java.lang.string. So this is how the constant pool looks like. Now in the resolution phase, what happens is, as you can see in the constant pool, these are the constant basically. I can say these are the static references or symbolic references. So in the resolution phase, what will happen is these symbolic references will be replaced with the actual memory references from the method area. That means this will get replaced with the actual memory location of the pointer to the string class. This will get replaced with the actual memory location of the object class. If we go to our presentation, yeah, and if the JVM is unable to find the specific class which is defined in the constant pool, then we get the java.lang.noClassDef found error. Now let's look at the final phase of class loading, which is nothing but the initialization phase. In this phase, the static variables are assigned with their original values defined in the code, and if there are any static blocks in the code, then they will be executed in top to bottom and from child to parent manner. If we take the same example which we saw in the prepare stage, then in this stage the value of wheel will be replaced to 2. Earlier we have seen the preparation phase, the value of wheels was set to 0. Now I hope you got answer to all your questions, like why static blocks are executed even before the instance is created. It happens during the initialization phase, and why you don't have to import any additional jars for using core Java classes at as it is taken care by the Bootstrap class loader. Now let's look at the various runtime data areas. We'll discuss about method area first. The method area is created when the JVM starts and it is shared among all the threads. The class loader reads the .class file and extracts the information and store it in the method area. Basically, this is an area where the metadata of a class is stored. Hence, this area is also known as meta space from Java 8 onwards. For each type, the class loader stores fully qualified name of the type. If we take the example of employee class which we have seen earlier, it belonged to com.example package. So the class loader will store the fully qualified name for employee like com.example.employee in the meta space. It also stores the fully qualified name of the immediate parent class. It also stores whether the type is a class or an interface. It also stores whether the type access modifier is public, abstract, or final. In addition to the basic information, the class loader also stores the information like constant pool, field information like for each field defined in a type, it stores the name of the field, the type of the field, and the field modifier. The field modifiers can be public, private, protected, static, final, volatile, and transient. It also stores the method information. For every method declared in a type, it stores method name, method return type, number and types of method parameters in order. Methods modifier can be public, private, protected, static, final, synchronized, native, or abstract. It also stores the static variable declared for a type. The variables which are declared statics are associated with the class and not with the instance of the class. So this information is also stored in the method area. Reference to the class. Once the type is loaded and stored in the method area, JVM will create an object of type java.lang.class in the heap area. This object can be used by programmers to get the class level information. We already seen this in detail, so I'm not going to talk about this now. Let's move to the next runtime data area, which is heap area. Just like the method area, heap area is also created when the JVM starts, and there is only one heap area per JVM. Heap can be accessed by multiple threads, and hence data stored in the heap is not thread safe. Whenever a class instance or an array is created in the in your application, the memory for a new object is allocated in the heap. The Java virtual machine itself is responsible for deciding whether and when to free the memory occupied by objects that are no longer referenced by running application. Usually, JVM implementation uses garbage collector to manage the heap. We have a next video upcoming shortly to explain how exactly the garbage collection works in Java. Let's take one simple example here. Let's say we have this class employee, um, and when we run this class, the heap area will be created. If we create one instance of employee like this, employee1 is equal to new employee, then the memory will be allocated for this object on a heap this way. You can see the ID is equal to 1 and salary is equal to 20,000 is stored for this employee1 object. And if we again create the another instance of employee class, then the memory will be allocated for another object like this on the heap. I hope you understood how the memory is allocated for new objects on the heap. Now let's look at the next runtime data area, which is JVM stack area. When a new thread is launched, the Java virtual machine creates a new Java stack for the thread. The Java stack stores a thread state in a discrete frames. The JVM only performs two operations directly on the Java stack. It pushes and pops the frames. The method that is currently being executed by a thread, it's thread current method. The stack frame for the current method is the current frame. When the thread invokes a Java method, the virtual machine creates and pushes a new frame onto the Java stack. This new frame then becomes the current frame like this. Now the method can complete in two ways. It can either complete normally by returning something, or it can complete by throwing an exception. In any of this case, the Java virtual machine pops and discards the method stack frame. The frame for the previous method then becomes the current frame. The stack frame has three parts: local variable array, operand stack, and frame data. Local variable array contains all parameters and local variable of the method in which they are declared. The operand stack act as a workspace, or we can say it is a workspace for doing some intermediate computation. Then we have the frame data. It contains the data to support the constant pool resolution or the normal method return and exception dispatch. Let's consider a scenario where you are writing a recursion program and you forgot to write the end criteria. In that case, the frames will be continuously pushed on the thread stack, and we will end up getting java.lang.stack overflow error. If there is a genuine case where you want to increase the stack space, then you can do this by specifying -xxx parameter while invoking your application. Let's take one simple example to understand how JVM stacks work internally. So I have this class stack example in which I have three methods: main, function1, and function2. Main method is calling function1 method, and function1 method is calling function2 method. So when we run this application, the JVM stack will be created, and when the thread comes to execute this main method, the one stack frame will be pushed on this JVM stack, and it will have this local variable array like this. It will have two variables on this local variable array, args and count, because these are two local variables to main method. Then we will have operand stack, which can be used by JVM to do some internal computations. Then we have this frame data. When the main method calls this function1 method, the new frame will be pushed to this JVM stack this way, and the function will also have its own local variable array, operand stack, and the frame data this way. Now you can see for function1 there are two variables defined in the local variable array. The first one is this, because this function1 is associated with the instance of the class. That is why this is a parameter which is getting passed by JVM to this function. And we have this count, which is nothing but the local variable which we are passing from the main method to function1. When the function1 calls function2, the new stack frame will be pushed to this JVM stack area, and it will also have its own local variable, frame data, and operand stack. Now let's look at the next runtime data area, which is PC register. For every thread, a separate PC register will be created at a time of thread creation. PC register contains the address of currently executing instruction. Once the instruction execution completes, automatically PC register will be incremented to hold the address of next instruction. Now the next runtime data area is native method stack. Methods written in languages other than Java are called native methods. When a thread invokes a Java method, the virtual machine creates a new frame and pushes it onto JVM stack. However, when a thread invokes a native method, the threads leaves the JVM stack behind, and instead of pushing a new frame onto the JVM stack, a new frame will be created on the native method stack. The third subsystem of the JVM is execution engine. Execution engine is the core of JVM. Execution engine can communicate with various runtime data areas. The bytecode that are assigned to the runtime data areas via class loader is executed by execution engine. It consists of interpreter, JIT compiler, and garbage collector. Let's look at each of these components in detail. Let's look at the interpreter first. It is responsible to read the bytecode and interpret it into machine code and execute that machine code line by line. The problem with interpreter is it interprets every time even if some method is invoked multiple times. This affects the performance of the system. Let's look at the JIT compiler. The main purpose of JIT compiler is to improve the performance. Internally, JIT compiler maintains a separate count for every method. Whenever JVM comes across any method call, first that method will be interpreted normally by interpreter and JIT compiler increments the corresponding count variable. This process will be continued for every method. If count for any method reaches threshold, then the JIT compiler identifies that the method as a repeatedly used method or hotspot. JIT compiler compiles that method and generates corresponding native code and puts it in the code cache. We also call it as a JIT code cache. Next time when JVM come across that method call, JVM will directly use the native code stored in the code cache and execute it instead of interpreting it once again, and hence the performance of the system will be improved. Some JIT compilers will recompile the generated native code if the count reaches threshold value so that more optimized code can be generated. Profiler, which is a part of JIT compiler, is responsible to identify the hotspot. Now let's look at how the garbage collection works in Java. If you have ever written program in C language, then you might be aware about the process of creating the object. In C, if you want to create any object, then the program has to allocate memory and is responsible for later manually deallocating that memory to delete any such object. If the programmer forgets to deallocate the memory, then the memory leak can occur and a large amount of memory will be consumed. In Java, this potential problem is avoided by automatic garbage collection. The programmer determines when the objects are created and the JVM is responsible for managing the object lifecycle. When the object is no longer referred, then it will be eligible for garbage collection and will be removed. Let's take a look at one example to understand this better. Let's say we have this class employee and we have this class student. In this class we have three methods: main method, and from main method we are calling function1 method, and from function1 method we are calling function2 method, and in function2 we are creating an object of employee. Now when we execute this method or when we run this application, the heap will be created, and when the execution will come to the main method, one frame will be pushed on this thread JVM stack this way. When the main method calls the function1 method, the new frame will be pushed on the thread JVM stack. And when the function1 will call the function2 method, the new frame will be pushed here. So, and now in the function2 we are creating object of employee. So new object will be created on a heap this way, and the function2 is having a reference to the employee object, and the employee object is local to the function2. So now when the execution of function2 completes, this function2 frame will be popped out from the thread JVM stack like this. And now you can see this employee object is not referred by any of the methods or any class. So this object is eligible for the garbage collection now. Now we also have this JNI to execute the native methods. It is an interface which interacts with native method libraries and provide the native libraries required for the execution. It enables JVM to call C++ libraries and to be called by C++ libraries which may be specific to hardware. Then we also have the collection of native libraries which are required by the execution engine. So that's all from me on the JVM architecture for this video. If you like the video, then please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to like, share and comment on the video. Thank you guys for now. See you soon.